Welcome to Unit 9, Lesson 3. The goal of today's lesson is to be able to factor an expression by grouping. Now, the good news is that we already have the key skills we need in order to do this. It's basically a bunch of GCF factoring just chunked into groups. Okay, so when you are able to factor by grouping, you need to have 4 or more terms. What you want to do is group the terms into pairs, so we're grouping them in groups of 2, and you factor the GCF out of each individual group. So all the GCFs that you factor out make up one of the factors of your expression, and then whatever's left over in your parentheses makes up the other factor. So for the first example, we have 4a cubed plus 24a plus a squared plus 6. And we want to factor this by grouping. So I'm going to group the first two terms together to group them in pairs. The 4a cubed and 24a is my first group. And my second group, my pairs, is a squared plus 6. So now I want to factor the GCF out of each group. So if I focus first on my red group, the 4a cubed plus 24a, the biggest number I can divide out of both of those is 4. And the biggest power of a that I can take out from both is just a to the first. So 4a is my GCF. When I factor that out of those pieces or divide it out, I'm left with a squared plus 6. So just like how we factored the GCF out in the last lesson. Now we're going to repeat the same thing for our blue group. Now as far as numbers go, I have a coefficient of 1 in front of the a squared and a 6. The only number I can take out of that is a 1, and they don't have any a's in common. So all I'm able to take out of the blue group as a GCF is 1, which means I have a squared plus 6 left. So now to figure out what the factors of your expression are, your GCFs make up one of those factors. So notice the GCFs I took out was a 4a from the red group, and I had a GCF of 1 from the blue group. So 4a plus 1 is one of my factors. Now when I look at the leftovers, what I had in the parentheses, from the red group there was a squared plus 6, and in the blue group my leftovers were a squared plus 6. These should always match. So if you get leftovers that don't match, you did something wrong. So a squared plus 6 is my second factor. So one factor came from the GCFs, the other factor came from the leftovers, which gives me 4a plus 1 and a squared plus 6 as my final factored form. Okay, let's look at another example. I have 2x squared minus 5x plus 10x minus 25. Since I have in this case, exactly 4 terms, I'm going to factor by grouping. So first I want to pair them up. My red group is going to be the first 2 terms, 2x squared minus 5x. My blue group is going to be the last 2 terms, 10x minus 25. So looking at the GCF of the red group, 2 and 5 don't have any common divisors, but I do have an x in common that I can take out. So when I divide out that GCF of x from both terms, I'm left with 2x minus 5. Taking a look at the blue group, 10x minus 25, the biggest number I can take out is a 5, and they don't have any x's in common, so 5 by itself is my GCF. So when I divide that out of both terms, I'm left with 2x minus 5, which makes sense because remember, my leftovers for each group are supposed to match. So now let's list the factors that we have. The first factor comes from my GCFs. A GCF of x and positive 5 gives me x plus 5 is one of my factors. My leftovers, the 2x minus 5 is the second factor. So there's my final answer of my factored form, x plus 5 and 2x minus 5. Okay, this is the last example we're going to do together. The same thing, notice I have more than 4 terms this time. So I'm going to go through factoring by grouping. Now remember, we're still grouping them in pairs. So x cubed plus 2x squared is my first pair. 3x squared plus 6x is my second pair. and negative 5x minus 10 is my third pair. So since I have more than 4 terms, I have more than 2 groups. So now I want to factor the GCF out of all 3 of those. So looking at the red group, the biggest thing they have in common is an x squared. And when I divide that out, I'm left with x plus 2. Looking at the blue group, the biggest number they have in common is 3, and I can take an x out of each. So 3x is my GCF. When I divide that out from both of my terms in the blue group, I'm left with x plus 2, which again makes sense because my leftovers are supposed to match. Now when I look at the orange group, the negative 5x minus 10, anytime you're leading with a negative term, that means your GCF is also going to be negative. So when I look at the negative 5 and the negative 10, they don't have an x in common, so all I can take out is a number. I can divide them both by negative 5. So when I divide that out, I'm left with x and then a plus 2 since I divided by a negative. Again, that's supposed to happen because all my leftovers are supposed to match. So when I go to make my list of factors, the first factor comes from all my GCFs. Now notice I'm going to have 3 terms because I have a GCF of x squared, positive 3x, and negative 5. So x squared plus 3x minus 5 is the first factor. And my second factor comes from the leftovers, which did all match. It was x plus 2. So combining both of those factors together gives me my fully factored form. Okay, if you have any questions or clarification from this video, please feel free to contact me. You have 3 to try on your own to submit for your grade for your assignment.